Hey there, everybody. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another edition of Favorite Albums Through the Decades, the show we're doing throughout the month of March, where we're picking bands who either have been or were around for quite a long time, recorded albums in more than 3 decades. So we've got joining us here today. We're keeping it in the Hudson Valley today. Member of the Hudson Valley Squares, Mr. Ryan Skow. And first time on the channel, also from the Hudson Valley, Craig Kracht. What's up, Craig? Good to have you on.
Good to be here.
This all came out from a conversation at our favorite local brewery owned by Mike Antonelli, brewery at Orange County Hops, in front of some live music a couple of weeks ago. These two fine gentlemen looked over to me and said, have you done a favorite albums through the decades, or are you planning on doing one for Blue Oyster Cult, because we want in? So here we have it, a week and a half, 2 weeks later. And so we've got BOC has recorded and released albums in the 70s, 80s, 90s. The 2000s are kind of dicey because one per decade. So what we're going to do is we're each going to name our favorite album from the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, and then we're going to do post 2000 all as one. So instead of doing one release for the 2000 to 2010 and then 2010 to 20, we're just going to pick our favorite from post 2000. So I'm going to have Craig, since you're first timer here, I'm going to have you start us off with your favorite album from the 70s.
Okay. It's hard because I love everything you've done in the 70s. I love the black and white period, obviously. I love On Your Feet and On Your Knees, Agents of Fortune, but this was my first. I was a kid in the 4th grade, and my friend had his brother's copy. He brought it in, and being a horror-obsessed kid, you know, songs like Nosferatu and Godzilla. I love The Night. It's my introduction to the cult, and still probably one of the more nuanced and varied albums they've ever put out, and just absolutely love this one. So from the Hammer horror seance going on, every single song. Golden Age of Leather is an absolute epic song. Godzilla, obviously. A lot of critics at the time, I think, said it was part of like an early decline of the cult, something like that. I never saw it that way. I always thought it was just a continuation of all the groundwork they laid before. So it's really hard to pick a 70s record, but being this is my first, absolutely, we'll go with this one.
I think Spectres is way underrated.
I think so too.
Big time. And I would say out of all their 70s albums, it's probably the one that I was not as into as a couple of others, like way back. And as the years have gone on, I have found that I love it a lot more. And it's probably, I'd say it's a top 3 from the decade for me now.
Absolutely. Me too.
No question. So good choice. Ryan, what do you got for the 70s?
I'm going to go, this is a tough one because like Uriah Heep, I think the bulk of their best stuff was in the 70s, and they had so many good albums to choose from. So I'm also going to go with the first album I bought from the band. This was very tough. I'm gonna have to split it here because I came into 2 albums and I could not pick. I just went back and forth all afternoon. I couldn't pick. So they're sequential. So the first one is their second album from 73, Tyranny Mutation. The first 4 songs on this album in a row, I think, are some of the 4 strongest like run of songs they ever did. Red and the Black, Hot Rails to Hell, 7 Screaming Disbusters in there, and the last track too, Mistress of the Salmon Salt, is a really good song, and the art by Bill Golick too, which he did the first 2 albums by them, and I think it's the most iconic cover art, you know. So that's fun, and I had to tie it, you know. I really had to tie it because I couldn't decide between that and their third album, Secret Treaties. This is again, Career of Evil, Dominance and Submission, freaking Astronomy. This is such a good album too. So I couldn't pick just one. I really tried.
You're pulling a Pardo today. I like that.
I know, it's like 6.5, you know, half a dozen. I couldn't pick. So
Great.
And you know, Agents of Fortune, the first album, you know, Spectres, they're also freaking good. So, but if I put a gun to my head, I'm gonna say Tyranny and Secret Treaties. Those are my 2 choices for the 70s.
Can't go wrong with either one.
Nope.
For me, I think those 2 and Spectres probably makes the holy trinity for me from that decade. I'm one of those guys that I like Agents of Fortune, but I don't think it's even close to being their favorite or their best from the decade for me anyway. I find half of Agents is good, the other half is really good, but I think they have stronger albums start to finish. Yeah. I like Absolutely. It. It's not a top tier album for me though.
It's good though. I do like it a lot.
So I'm going to go with no surprise here, Secret Treaties. This is basically a pretty perfect album for me. Career of Evil, Subhuman, Dominance and Mission, ME 262. I mean, that is like 4 songs in a row. Absolutely amazing. I think the only song on this album that I'm like not like super in love with is Cagey Cretins, but that's kind of fun too. Harvester of Eyes, Flaming Telepaths, and Astronomy is a great back end. I mean, this is an album that like kicks your ass at the front end and then goes out in style and really kicks your ass once again, closing it out. So yeah, this was a no-brainer for me, but I applaud both of your picks because those would be my other two if I was to do three of them from the decade. So so this one, this was a challenge, but ultimately not that hard. I think for me, the hardest one here was the 80s, because for me, there's two albums in the 80s that I adore. And I had a hard time picking between two of them. So Craig, what do you got for the 80s?
In the 80s, I probably have the same feeling you do about the two albums, but I went with this one. Fire of Unknown Origin. This one, I love the heavy metal movie. I'm a huge fan of that. I love the song Joan Crawford on here. Veteran of the Psychic Wars, the Michael Moorcock lyrics. This one's just absolutely great. I mean, I'm a big fan of Cultosaurus Erectus as well. But there's a couple songs that I've kind of, like Hungry Boys, I'm not the hugest fan of. It's got great stuff like Lips in the Hills and Unknown Tongue. But I think for the 80s, I would go with Fire of Unknown Origin, definitely.
Good choice. Ryan, how about you?
I'll tell you what, as a kid, I did not listen to a lot of FM radio. So I know their big hits back then were obviously, Burning for You, Godzilla. Those are big hits. Obviously, the big one, which I'm not even going to name because everybody knows it. But I didn't really hear them until, like Craig said, I saw the heavy metal movie. A friend of mine showed that to me back in high school. And I'm watching that, and that became one of my favorite Blue Oyster Cult songs, Veteran of the Psychic Wars. So my first exposure to the band was this. I'm going to throw this in real quick. Was the soundtrack to the animated movie Heavy Metal from 1981. So that led on to me, then I bought Tyranny Mutation, but one of the first albums I bought after that was, Fire of Unknown Origin. And I mean, the Martin Birch production on this is great. It has like a nice, warm, very analog sound. Obviously his work with Maiden, Rainbow, Sabbath was all great, but I really love the work that Birch did on this album. Love the artwork. There's not a single weak song on this. Some like obviously like Vengeance the Pact, you read it, it's like they're describing the last scene in the animated movie, which is cool. I didn't even pick up on that for a couple of years. I'm reading it and I'm like, wait a second, this is like the last scene with Tarna, yeah, I love this. I like Club Ninja a lot too. I know that's not kind of a popular album, but I do think it's real good. And this is a good one too. This is a great. That's probably one of the coolest album covers in the history of like recorded music. It's just so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm going with Fire of Unknown Origin because that was my introduction to the band, not as an album, but like hearing that song, I'm like, I got to check these guys out. Like this is not like your usual like 70s, 80s rock. This is very like cerebral and different and weird. Obviously, like Craig said, the Moorcock lyrics were always prominent. They always had great lyrics. Perlman's lyrics throughout the years. I think the guy Shirley wrote some of the lyrics later on. So they always had great sci-fi authors. Yeah, they always were a very, very cerebral band. And this album, I think, is a great example of that. Like right around halfway or midpoint of their career, or actually the first third of their career by now. Yeah, I'm going with this one.
Yeah. So a couple things. So you brought up the Martin Birch production, which I think is fantastic on this album, and it might be one of my favorites by him. Interestingly enough, though, this album, from a production standpoint, does not sound at all like Cultosaurus Erectus. They sound very different from each other.
They do,
which I think is kind of neat, right? Because most people, when you talk about Martin Birch, most people talk about how much they love his production style, but how a lot of the albums he worked on kind of have a similar sound. Which I don't know if I agree with that. I think it depends on the band because like a perfect example. So Fire of Unknown Origin and Cultosaurus, same producer, both sound really different. Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, same producer, both sound really different. Maybe with Maiden, he got a similar sound from album to album to album, but I think that with some of the other bands he worked with, not so much.
With Maiden, I wouldn't say, but he did more albums with them, so there's more to choose from. But yeah, these two albums, they don't really sound at all alike. Like I didn't even know this was by him for a long time, and then I was like, that it is because it just doesn't sound kind of like him, and it doesn't sound like this. So yeah, I agree. But they both sound good though, in their own little way. They have a very good production.
Absolutely. Part of me wanted to go with Cultosaurus because that was the first album by them I ever bought, and I bought that as soon as it came out, and I liked that album a lot. But ultimately, I went with the same one you guys did, Fire of Unknown Origin, because I think this is a pretty epic album. This is a top 3 or 4 album from them for me.
I'd say
easily.
So.
Yeah, it's a really good 80s hard rock album. early 80s, 1981. So many great tracks on here. Veteran of Psychic Wars, Joan Crawford, Soul Survivor is great. Title track, heavy metal, Black and Silver. I mean, it's heavy, it's kind of proggy. There's good like pop hooks on here too. It's got a little bit of everything that they did so well. So yeah, that's my choice from the 80s. As we move on to the 90s, I'm sure this one will be another pick across the three of us. That'll be the same. Craig, what do you got?
Probably pretty obvious, but heaven forbid.
Yeah.
Great songs on it. It's got See You in Black, which I absolutely love. Harvest Moon, Live for Me, another in a weird way inspirational, just like Golden Age of Leather is inspirational to me. It's a really excellent record. I didn't know this was coming out, and so I was working in a CD store when this came out, and opened a box and saw a new BOC album cover and got really excited. And I've been playing it ever since, but heaven forbid from the 90s.
Yep. Ryan, I'm guessing you got the same.
I got the same choice, and for me, they were one of those. This is going back years now. I had a lot of their 70s stuff, had some of their 80s stuff. I didn't know this album. Like, they're just one of the bands whose later stuff I didn't know. And I got to give a shout out. It was Chris Black from the band High Spirits. Mentioned he's just in. You don't have a heaven forbid. You got to hear that out. I forget where we were exactly. It was like reeling in passing. But I love his band. I respect his opinion. So I checked it out, and yeah, See You in Black is awesome. One of the heaviest songs they ever did. Harvest Moon has that Lovecraft, Edgar Allan Poe, like New England, like folksy horror. Love those lyrics. I love that they still play that live.
Yeah. Power
Underneath Despair. Like, this album's it's a great album. It's a really good album. I see we all have the same cover. I know there's like another cover that has like a Morgan Fairchild kind of is like a Statue of Liberty-esque, like holding up in like a gown. I don't have that one. But I've seen it. I've seen that artwork though online a few times. So I don't know if it's yeah, I don't have that one at all. But yeah, this is my favorite from the 90s. Great album. So, and obviously the only other choice was Cult Classic, which is cool too, but I figured none of us would pick that one.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really good album. It's really heavy. I think this is like the one of the albums that like most people like never heard, because I mean, CMC like released this to like no fanfare. I mean, Craig, if you were working in a CD store at the time, you probably had no idea this was coming in. All of a sudden, there it is, right? I mean, they didn't advertise this. You didn't see this in the magazines, nothing. They just threw it out there. It's arguably one of the heaviest albums, I think.
It is.
Hammerback and See You in Black. I mean, there's a handful of tracks here really heavy, but the tunefulness of the band shines through. Yeah, I mean, the cover is awful. That I'm sure it didn't help matters either. I don't even know. I don't think I've ever seen the other one, but I'm sure that's probably better than this. But yeah, an overlooked album in their catalog and a really good one. So if anybody's watching who hasn't taken a look at this,
I'm an idiot. It's CD inlay.
It's the insert, man.
Oh yeah, there it is. Okay.
It's supposed to be Morgan Fairchild, or it's based on Morgan Fairchild.
It totally looks like her, yeah.
What the internet says.
Okay.
I believe everything on the internet, so there you go.
Yeah, I don't know if that was like an alternate cover. I don't know what that has to do with Heaven Forbid, the title, but whatever. It's a great album. So check it out if you haven't, because if you haven't, you're missing out on a really, really good Blue Oyster Cult album, a really heavy one too.
I agree.
All right, so the 2000s. So we've got basically Curse of the Hidden Mirror and The Symbol Remains. So one at the beginning of the 2000s, one just released last year. So Craig, what are your thoughts between
Symbol Remains is one of my favorite releases of the last year. Absolutely love The Symbol Remains. I was kind of lukewarm on Curse of the Hidden Mirror, to be honest with you. It was like the only BOC album I listened to only a couple times and filed away. Usually I listen to them over and over and over again. But yeah, Symbol Remains is one of the best records I've heard in decades, literally. And I was very happy when it came out. And I'm going to go with that one.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with Craig. Curse of the Hidden Mirror. I mean, I don't think it's a bad album.
That's not a bad album.
It's probably my least favorite album they ever did. If I had to pick one, I would say that. But because they're a New York band and they like to tour constantly, Craig and myself have seen them at least once a year, every year for like going on years now. So we've seen the band. He's seen them, long before that too. Before he met me. Going way back, but and then actually they were the only band we managed to see last year after the pandemic started. They played in a big field, like a drive-in movie theater, like a county fair way up in New Hampshire. So we got in the car, drove 4.5 hours way up to Bumblefuck, New Hampshire to watch Blue Oyster Cult. We had actually seen them, and this was back in July of 2020. We had seen them in like February 2020. So we saw them twice last year. So
yeah, they played right before everything shut down. I remember that. Yep.
Yeah, and that was a great show. And the show up in the middle of the hayfield was good too. So
You
You
know,
know,
the
they,
vigil at Twilight was amazing. As the sun was falling, and they're playing the vigil. It was just a great experience. So.
it was. They sounded good. They've always been in good form. You know what? I know Eric talked about and Buck talked about a couple times over the years. We're going to do a new album. We're going to do a new album. Obviously, it had been almost 20 years at that point. So they finally came out with it on Frontiers Records, and I thought it just kicked fucking ass. Yeah, I'm going with this one. You know what? Every song on this album is cool. I've listened to it, I don't know, a couple hundred times since I bought it last year. But
So
that
very different. All the songs are very different.
yeah, it's classic Blue Oyster Cult that if they have like a whole bunch of songs on the album, it's not the same song over and over. The style varies wildly, which they've always been. It's always been one of their calling cards. Yeah, Tainted Blood, Nightmare Epiphany, The Return of Cecilia, The Alchemist. It's got a little bit of that sense of humor they've always had. Just subtle. No, this is classic Blue Oyster Cult to me. And obviously now it's just Eric and Buck, and they got our Richie Castellano, Danny Miranda, and who's Jules Rodino is the drummer. So they've got some new blood in the band. Obviously Alan passed away a couple of years ago. The Bouchard brothers haven't been in the band a million years. But even with the new guys, I think they kick ass. Buck sounds good. Eric sounds good. They trade off a lot. Everybody takes turns singing. Richie sings a couple songs. Great fucking album. I like this a lot. Thought it was one of the best albums from last year. If you haven't heard this and you like the band, you're fucking up. Go check this out because it is really, really good. So I'm going with the new Blue Oyster Cult one for their most recent pick.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement. Symbol Remains is it for me. Everything you guys said, great album. Love the new lineup. I think everybody contributes. I mean, let's be real here. These guys have been playing together live for a number of years, so they know each other really well. I love that they keep up the tradition of having multiple vocalists in the band. Now you got, two hot guitar players in the band. Richie does some cool soloing on this album as well. But, mainly it's like there's all this variety. You got the heavy tunes, you got the more poppy songs, you got, the whimsical stuff they do. There's a couple mellow tunes that are really, really good. And everything is so catchy on here. And it's just an amazing album. One of the best. I hate to call it a comeback because they really have never gone away. They just come back to putting out a new record, I guess, after so many years. And, in defense, this is a very solid album. I think the only thing that this album doesn't have going for it is it's not a very rockin' album.
Yeah.
It's kind of mellow. It's kind of sedate. All the other elements are here. I mean, all the trademark, melodies and things like that are here. Good, memorable songs. It needs a little heft, especially when you compare it to this one, which this is really heavy. This is not at all. But I think this is a very intelligent album, which, BOC has always had that intelligent heavy metal, the thinking man's heavy metal band, right? That's kind of followed them around for ages. They were never a metal band, but I think there's less of the heavy on here, but everything else is still here. Fine record. If that was the last thing they went out with, I'm okay with that. But now that they did this,
It's incredible.
And I don't know if we'll get more, but I'm hoping we do.
Yeah, I agree. Well, when I say I thought Curse was their worst album, I don't really mean it as a slag against them because
there's no bad BOC records to me at all. But.
Exactly. They're like their worst is still very, very good. So yeah, if they went out with the new one, I mean, I hope they do another one, but the band has great chemistry. They play live a lot. Hopefully they'll start playing live a lot more. They're really tight live. So hopefully they kind of keep that ball rolling and we get another one before too long. But if that was the last album they ever did, that would be a fine swan song, I think. So
yeah. It's funny, for so many people said for so many years that Club Ninja was actually their weakest album. And Club Ninja actually has aged pretty well, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. It's got some good stuff on there.
Yeah.
Fun. It's a fun album. Dancing in the Rooms is in my head all the time. That is such
Even White Flags I like. There's a lot of stuff on there I really go back and listen to over and over again.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, all their claimed weaker albums all have really good material, like Revolution by Night's another one.
That's a good album too.
Both have a lot of really good material on them, there's no real stinker album, I don't think. And, we didn't even mention Imaginos, which is kind of a weird album for them because I don't know how much of a true Blue Oyster Cult album it actually is in the end because so many people had their hands in that at the time. But there's some great stuff on that as well, right?
I don't know the story 100% behind that one, but I've always wondered, and I guess I could research it, if that was kind of like a 7-star Black Sabbath, where it wasn't really meant to be, and then the record label's like, we could make more money if you put the name on it. So they're like, well, fine, fuck it, put the name on it. Then
it was supposed to be, from what I understand, like a Joe Bouchard solo album.
That's what I've heard. Yeah, I don't know like the details of it, but I always heard it was not meant to be like a a true Blue Oyster Cult album, and then
Yeah.
like, oh, we'll put the name on it to sell more CDs.
Yeah. And from what I understand, like nobody was in the studio at the same time, and they called in various members of BOC to go drop in a couple vocals or play a little guitar here and there, and boom, now you got a BOC album. But that was never conceived in the studio with all the members of Blue Oyster Cult saying, "Okay, we're going to do this album called Imaginos." That was Bouchard's baby. That was his story, his idea, along with I believe Sandy also.
Perlman, yeah.
Yeah, was concocting that with him. So yeah, that was another. Which, I mean, look at the time, 1988, right? So right around the same time, Seven Star was not long before that, and Seven Star also was supposed to be like a Tony solo album. Once the record label got wind of all this, like, well, we're just gonna make it a Black Sabbath.
Not it.
Right.
Still, you know what? I like both of those albums a lot.
I was just gonna say, absolutely. I mean, I'm a big fan of Seven Star. So whether it's a Sabbath album or a Tony Iommi solo album, it's still great in my book.
Good music.
Yeah. So there you have it, everybody. Not ranking the albums, favorite albums through the decades for Blue Oyster Cult. So in the comments below, please list your favorite BOC album for all these decades that we mentioned. And it'll be interesting to see what everybody has come up with. And I want to thank Craig and Ryan for helping out in this episode. I think we got some Motorhead in our future, right?
Excellent.
Between the three of us. Okay, that is going to happen then this week sometime. So stay tuned for that, everybody. That's an even bigger discography and more to choose from. So that should be interesting. So stay tuned, everybody. Visit us on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, of course. We're here on YouTube all the damn time. So for Craig and Ryan, I am Pete Pardo. See you guys later on. Have a good one.
Good night.
Good night.